Today, I want to discuss the characters in the lore stories of Marvel Rivals and pick out which characters could become playable in the future. I'm basically going to throw up on screen a bunch of lore evidence showing the character in the lore itself just to help you out as well. I'm going to use 3 different colors to represent how likely a character could be added to the game, starting with green representing a 99% chance of being added because there's always that 1% chance the devs go, then blue, which is 50% chance and represents characters that could become playable or could become an NPC into the game. Finally, purple, which is a 1% chance or no chance at all at becoming a character and solely exists in the lore of Marvel Rivals. There's that 1% chance because the devs could always pull something out of their butts and make that character playable. This is all my theory and speculation on how likely these characters will be added. Here's a list of the characters I will be discussing in order. There's also timestamps I added to help out. To begin, we're going to have Dr. Doom, Reed Richards, Psylocke, Charles Xavier, Jean Grey, the Phoenix Force, Knull, Odin, Dracula, Wolverine, Black Widow, Squirrel Girl, Shuri, Cloak and Dagger, Winter Soldier, Moon Knight, Blade, Morbius, Deadpool, Antman, Curt Connors, the Lizard, Elsa Bloodstone, Jericho Drumm, Wong, Kate Bishop, Gwenpool, Daimon Hellstrom. Okay, get ready, buckle up. It's time to actually begin this speculation and theory crafting to figure out which characters I think could be added to this game. Let's begin, baby! Dr. Doom is the most discussed character in the lore stories. There was even a recent trailer that has Doombots and 2 Dr. Dooms appearing. The story of Marvel Rivals also centers on these 2 Dooms. We know Dr. Doom is an NPC in Marvel Rivals because it was revealed at San Diego Comic-Con, next to 2 other NPC characters that are in the game, being the Master Weaver and Spider-Zero. Both of these characters exist on the newest Tokyo 2099 map. I do think that looking at the art that Doom could be added as a playable character later down the line as a Vanguard, because if you look at his guns, man, his arms are huge! He's huge! He looks like Big Form Ram from Overwatch. And I also believe if they are to add Dr. Doom to the game, they would either just explain it later down the line of adding him very late to the game and being like, hey, and lore implications, one of the Dr. Dooms is actually good and he's helping you fight, say, the 2099 version of Dr. Doom. That, or this is my random, dumb, crazy conspiracy theory, grab that tinfoil hat, but I could see them bringing in a 3rd Dr. Doom to basically help solve this whole issue of, hey, there's 2 Dr. Dooms fighting. Who is going to know Dr. Doom more than anybody else? It ain't Reed Richards. It ain't Iron Man like everyone's speculating online for that new Avengers movie. It's Dr. Doom. Another Dr. Doom would know perfectly about what the other 2 Dooms are thinking. Don't get me wrong. That Dr. Doom might have his own reasonings for why he's there. It could be that he's pissed that his own universe got destroyed. There could be a huge handful list of things that make Dr. Doom actually added to the lore. And they could explain it very well just by adding a 3rd Dr. Doom. They mention the multiverse over and over in this lore. The whole multiverse is basically melding together. That's why, for instance, in Storm's lore piece, they talk about Krakoa and Rako combining. Like, what the But, yeah. The next character on our list is Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic, in which he has 3 to 4 lore references, being in Iron Man, Black Panther, and Spider-Man's storyline. He's also physically there talking with Iron Man, as well as Black Panther, that helps solve the 2 Dr. Doom's problems, and basically Chronovium, and trying to solve whatever that is as well. Believe that Reed Richards is going to have a 99% chance of being added to the game because, number 1, he's the arch nemesis to Dr. Doom, or basically, he's the good guy to Dr. Doom, and they always fight all the time in the comics. So if you're going to add Dr. Doom to the game, even if it's just an NPC or lore-related material, you're most likely going to have Reed Richards in there at some point. And also them mentioning the Fantastic Four and the Avengers in New York, all helping to try to solve the Dracula problem, as well as the 2 Doom problems, raises a lot of questions, and it seems that there could be a high likelihood of the Fantastic Four showing up in Marvel Rivals at some point. We might just get Reed Richards first, then get like, say, the Thing or Invisible Woman second. It will just trickle down until eventually we have the entire Fantastic Four. Moving on to Psylocke, which I also think she's going to get added to the game. She's physically there in the Mantis and Jeff storyline, in which she helps them escape from the Collector. She also ended up in the Collector's collection, just like Jeff and Mantis, and she helps break them out. That's really it. There's even other mentions of her, a telepathic ninja, the stoic warrior. She even says that her name's Psy, but then corrects herself later on at the very end and says that her name is Psylocke. So if she's there physically helping Jeff and Mantis, it seems that she has a very high likelihood of being in the game. Moving on to Charles Xavier, which I think is a 50-50 shot. And let me explain. He shows up quite a bit in the lore, about 3 times it seems. And basically why I believe he's gonna have a 50-50 shot is I don't know how they're going to incorporate his abilities into the game. And I don't know exactly what role he would play either. I could see him being damage or strategist. I'm mostly leaning towards strategist. They would have to play with his abilities a little bit and maybe exaggerate them and be like, hey, his psychic blast now actually do damage you and physically hurt you. He can maybe like cause you to have a seizure, so now you're just stunned, so your character's just wigging out on screen for 3 seconds. There's also a clip from like Marvel Ultimate Alliance or some fighting game, Marvel vs. Capcom, where my boy is doing flips and spins in his little chair, beating the shit out of him. But then again, I don't exactly know how they would do his powers, Charles Xavier. And the next character kind of does the exact same thing as Charles Xavier, but has more potential, which is the Phoenix Force Jean Grey, or Jean Grey with the Phoenix Force, rather, because they mention a powerful cosmic presence. They mention a majestic bird. They literally say Phoenix Force. It seems that they're not outright mentioning Jean Grey, so this is kind of a long stretch to say, oh, it's Jean Grey. But they do mention the Phoenix Force a lot in the lore. And so my implication is that we're either going to see Jean Grey show up with the Phoenix Force, or another character is going to show up with the Phoenix Force. And so to refute Charles Xavier, if Charles Xavier wasn't to get added, Jean Grey has a very similar power set, and on top of the Phoenix Force, you could really make her a strategist and say that, yeah, the Phoenix Force, she can maybe give some of the Phoenix Force to other people, which the Phoenix Force has been, so the Phoenix Force has been used by 5 people at the same time, and so I could see Jean Grey literally just giving a piece of the Phoenix Force, and that heals or shields you or gives you a damage boost or any kind of video game buff. And then she has the Psychic Blast and the telekinesis and everything else that Charles Xavier has. So if they weren't to add Charles, they would add Jean Grey to the game. Even though I both think they're a 50-50 shot, because they don't outright mention Jean Grey in this anywhere, and she's not physically there. And they keep talking about Charles Xavier's Xavier's future plan for everybody, but he's not physically there. Moving on to Knull, who probably has the second most piece of information besides Doctor Doom in the lore. And I actually could see him very well being added to the game or an NPC. Because if Doctor Doom is an NPC for, say, a Latveria map, it wouldn't surprise me if Knull is an NPC for Clintar, which is the planet that all the symbiotes like live on. He'll be the same way as like the Master Weaver, where he shows up at like the 3rd point, and so he's just standing there doing whatever. But I also could see him being a playable character in the game, because he could be very similar. He could be a mix between Venom and Magic and use the Necro Sword, and then just have like symbiote powers. He might have like minions, like mind-controlled symbiotes that he might just use, and then might have a sword. I don't know. I could see him being really any of the roles. To be honest with you, I'm leaning towards strategist, because the leaks suggest that Ultron's a strategist and he uses minions. It wouldn't surprise me if Knull has symbiotes and those symbiotes heal you. And it would also be kind of interesting to have a spider, quote-unquote spider character, even though it's a Venom character. You would have Venom and Penny Parker as vanguards. You would have Spider-Man as damage, and you would have Knull as strategist. That would be pretty cool. You'd almost have like a spider symbiote team. And they're going to be a team up with Venom. It'd be really neat. I think he is going to show up as either an NPC or a playable character, though. So, remember that one. Remember that. On to Odin! Odin shows up actually physically and not. So they mention Odin in the Loki lore. Basically, Loki put Odin asleep so that he could take over Asgard. Simple as that. That's all Loki wanted. That's why in the game it's called Yggdrasil. I probably butchered that. I'm so sorry, but I do not care. So let's move on. He actually physically talks to Adam Warlock. Adam and Odin go back and forth talking, and then Odin admits about how Loki basically put Odin asleep. I think this character will not be added to the game because even though I just dropped all of that information, I still don't think he'll be added to the game. I think it would be cool, but I think he would play way too similar to one of his 3 children, specifically 4. You already have 4 as a Vanguard, Hela as damage, and Loki as strategist, so every role has been fulfilled. So I really don't see a point of Odin needing to be added. And I also think his abilities would just be similar, or even if they made him a separate character with separate abilities, you already got 4 Hela and Loki, so. Moving on to Dracula! I also think Dracula is a 1%. He's a lore character. He essentially used the Darkhold, maybe, to take over New York, but New York is under perpetual darkness because of him. The Dracula castle is also in New York, so. And all the lore pieces, too, they don't mention physically seeing Dracula. And I think in the trailer, that big bat that you see flying across the screen could be Dracula. That's just me guessing. I think he might be a similar situation to Knull, where he might just be an NPC on the map. And I don't think he's going to be a playable character because of a character I'm going to talk about later down the line. And you'll hear me geek out about it for a second. Maybe. It's not really me geeking. It starts with Morb. Let's move on. Wolverine! So Wolverine, which is surprising, he actually is physically there and he shows up in 2 lore stories. And he helps save the day in magic. And then he talks about going on a date with Black Widow. So, which is the next character we'll talk about. I think he has a 110% chance of getting added to the game. But they could always do that 1% thing. I think him being physically here in the lore and helping out, he's already trying to help the fight. So it seems like a no-brainer that he's going to be a playable character. That's really it. Moving on. We solved it. Let's go. Black Widow. I think Black Widow is the exact same thing. She shows up in the lore itself physically there, helping save the day in the Punisher story, as well as the whole Wolverine's trying to go on a date, i.e. date beating up Doombots with Tasha, so I think it's a no-brainer that she's getting added. Even in the lore themselves, if you read up on the Punisher lore, they talk about her abilities. They say electroplasm rifle. They say all these goofy words. They mention basically half of her abilities. This sniper rifle that she has. So they're already just hinting, just giving it away. So it's a no-brainer. She's most likely being added. Any really popular character is going to be added. Moving on to Squirrel Girl. That's right. She physically shows up in the Iron Man story and complains to a bunch of Doombots that they might have hurt her squirrel, Cyril. And she complains the whole time. The Doombots say that they would never hurt animals because it's under Doom. Like, it would just be something dumb. And so she's physically there helping out. Even Spider-Man mentions the 3 of them. Squirrel Girl, of course. That was the core group. So mentioning Spider-Man, Cloak and Dagger, and Squirrel Girl were all working together to solve this Dracula problem as well. And Reed Richards and Iron Man are communicating by using squirrels to send messages to avoid them getting caught by Doombots. Moving on. Shuri! I think it's a 50% chance. It could be a 1% chance, but let me explain. She's collaborating with Iron Man, Reed Richards, and T'Challa to work on a device to prevent the 2 Dooms from destroying the entire multiverse. And also, with Shuri, she could be a tech-based character that uses tech to heal people, and she could be a strategist, she could be a damage, and that's
would basically be it. She would just use tech powers. She would have devices to heal people. She would have devices to stun enemies. So, pretty simple. I think it's a 50% chance of her being added. She's physically there in the story. She's discussing with all the characters. And if she's already trying to help out, it would make sense that she would be added at some point. I don't know if her popularity of a character when she would be added, and that's why I think it could be a 1% chance of her ever getting added to the game, because there's so many popular characters that exist that I'm not even scratching the surface as to all the popular characters people like. For instance, I'm not covering Nightcrawler, Gambit, a ton of the mutants, so I don't know. You could do some interesting skins with Shuri, which would be awesome to see. Maybe you get a Black Panther skin, would be dope. But I think it's a 50% chance if they ever need more strategists in the game, they can pick up Shuri. Easy peasy. And I think Black Panther could officially get a cool team-up ability, because Black Panther and Magic is such an odd team-up. Why not Black Panther Storm? I know I'm ranting. Or you could do a Black Panther Shuri, but I'll move on. Now we're on to Cloak and Dagger. But Cloak and Dagger, I guess, have been meeting with Spider-Man in New York since the whole Dracula took over New York. And so Cloak and Dagger basically just talked to Peter Parker the whole time about the Dracula situation. That's it. I think they're gonna get added to the game. They're physically there helping Spider-Man solve the Dracula problem. Earlier I mentioned that they were a part of Spider-Man's little group, which is just Spider-Man, Squirrel Girl, and Cloak and Dagger. That's it. That's his small little street team right now. In which there's other characters that he's mentioning. There's 2 other characters that are going to join Spider-Man's street team. One of them is Morbius, and Blade. And so I do believe they are strategists, which is gonna be cool. It's gonna be awesome. And from the leaks, it seems like you're gonna play this half healer, half damage, where you're swapping between characters, which is a really awesome concept. On to the Winter Soldier. They outright just rip his name off out of any character. They mention Squirrel Girl, and then they go, oh yeah, Winter Soldier was there in New York to help out for a bit, and then he just left. And they dropped the Avengers, basically trying to solve this whole Doctor Doom situation. I think if they're just outright pulling Winter Soldier's name out of here, I see him being added to the game, because there's been, number 1, there's been leaks about it. Number 2, it wouldn't surprise me if Captain America's best friend, the Winter Soldier, gets added to the game. But the only issue, which I've been reading in the previous comments and stuff, is that a lot of people think that he would play very similar to Punisher. I also agree. I just see that they're going to use different weaponry, and I think they're going to do that with certain characters, similar to Overwatch. How in Overwatch, you had Soldier 76 and Sojourn. They both basically had an AR. That's what I think is going to happen here, is that the Winter Soldier is going to have an AR, maybe with a grenade launcher. And maybe he's going to have an ability with his metal arm. Or he's going to throw... Maybe he's just a more damage focused. I'm not exactly sure. I do see him being way too similar, though. And so I hope he doesn't get added until later down the line, where we've already had more unique characters, such as a Moon Knight, an Antman, Morbius, Charles Xavier, or Jean Grey. Add those kind of interesting characters before going back and kind of making a character that's just a Punisher 2.0. Don't get me wrong, Winter Soldier can be unique, and they can make him a very interesting character that could play entirely different than Punisher. But we'll just have to wait and see. On to Moon Knight! A character that a ton of people want added to the game. In the Scarlet Witch lore piece, she mentions to Doctor Strange that in order to solve this whole Dracula problem, that she needs to go pick up a loose cannon, i.e. Moon Knight, because she mentions after all, the moon is his guiding light. She hoped he was still alive and not yet completely insane. Moon Knight has multiple personality disorder. He's always insane in the comic books. And Scarlet Witch mentions the moon is his symbol, essentially. The character with a moon symbol is Moon Knight. And so I think he has a very high likelihood of getting added to the game. I'm pretty sure even the devs had stated at one point that Captain America and Moon Knight were on the list of characters to be added to the game. Or they said something along the lines of that they were going to be added at some point. Don't quote me on that. Also, about Captain America, there is no mention of him in the lore anywhere. So, and maybe that's why Winter Soldier left. Blade! And the Spider-Man lore piece, Spider-Man is essentially trying to recruit a bunch of superheroes to join his street team against Dracula in New York. And the person that Spider-Man is actually trying to look for is Blade, since he's a vampire hunter. So, duh. And so Blade would be a very obvious choice to help solve the problem in New York and get rid of Dracula, basically, who runs all the vampires. It's a no-brainer. I could see him being added to the game. Moving on to Morbius! Morbius! Morbin! Okay, it's Morbin time. In the Spider-Man lore storyline, Spider-Man actually gets pinned down by a bunch of vampires and is gonna be killed by them. And then Morbius shows up out of nowhere and beats the shit out of all the vampires. And then Morbius was like, hey man, I've been watching you the whole time when you've been hanging out with Cloak and Dagger. Like, you shouldn't be doing this. The vampires are gonna eat you too. That's literally what just almost happened to you. And then Morbius wants to join Spider-Man's street team, and Spider-Man decides that it's a great idea. He just doesn't know how he's going to explain it to Blade, who's the person that he's looking for. I also see Morbius being added to the game instead of Dracula. That's why Dracula was at a 1%, because Morbius would probably play the same way. And if not, I don't see Dracula being added, because, boom, Morbius! You got him right here! Boom, 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 boom! And he would actually be a very interesting character. He would probably be very basic, though. And I don't know how... You could do a lot of interesting skins, and you could do quite a bit, so we'll have to wait and see. He would be a damaged character. I wouldn't see him being anything else. Deadpool! Deadpool's name, Wade Wilson, is mentioned in the Jeff storyline, in which just Jeff talks about remembering all of his friends and how they would get out of a situation that he's stuck in. And basically, and Wade would simply sweet talk the guards into letting him out, winning their favor with false promises of money and tacos. I believe Deadpool is a 99% chance of being added to the game simply because of his popularity alone, I think is why he would be added. They mention him once in the lore, so there's really not a lot to go off of, but I wouldn't be surprised if he gets added at some point in the game. He would probably fall into the damage category, and he would probably use like dual pistols and dual katanas. I thought of a dumb idea where maybe he has like a mystery box or he breaks the fourth wall and can randomly pick a weapon out and have a similar ability to any character in the game. I don't know. Something goofy, something fourth wall breaky. There's a lot of things you can do with Deadpool, but so many people want him in the game. He just had a movie. Marvel's most popular characters right now, and has kind of always been. He literally had his own video game back in the day. Moving on to Antman! But in the Jeff the Landshark lore story, they don't outright mention Antman's name, but they do mention Hank Pym in the Jeff the Landshark lore story, where Jeff the Landshark goes into the collector's room, the collection, and he eats a vial marked Pym on it. And it makes Jeff 10 times his size, and he's able to defeat all the collector's guards and escape with Mantis and Psylocke. It's very short. That's literally all we have on it. I think Ant-Man could be any of the roles in the game, number one. Number two, let me go one step further. He could be a strategist. And if Ant-Man had a shrinking and growing ability, it would be actually very interesting as a strategist, because hypothetically they could say that when you're growing or shrinking, it could heal you, and it would be a whole you got refueled kind of thing. And so if you grew in size, hypothetically, let's just take Spider-Man for example. Say you throw some Pym particles on the Spider-Man and he grows to, say, Venom size, right? Then he's able to do more damage and land his shots easier. But the enemies are also able to land their shots easier on the Spider-Man since he's now a bigger target. And he would become essentially a vanguard for a short time. And on top of that, maybe you can shrink Spider-Man down to, say, Rocket Raccoon size, and now he does way less damage. Maybe he's a little bit faster, has less health, but he's super hard to hit now, and he's able to just flame through the air and knock up a bunch of the enemies. So it would come with its like good sides and bad sides. It would be cool. I don't know how you would implement it as a developer. It'd be a very interesting ability. If not, they could just make Antman like a damage, and then his ult is just he turns into the Giant Man. Simple. They can do stuff like that. He could have a movement ability that shrinks him. They don't have to go the whole strategist route. They could even make him a Vanguard where he's already giant in size, and then he can shrink down, and then just, I don't know, basically teleport in front of you, because he can be the size of a pea. I think he's definitely going to get added at some point, just like Deadpool. I just don't know exactly when. They do mention in the Spider-Man story, as well as Iron Man, the Avengers are trying to work on solving this problem. So he might be an Avenger that's trying to solve that problem. We'll see. Moving on to the next character, the Lizard, Curt Connors, which I think he has a 50% chance of being added. They don't outright mention the Lizard in this, but they do have Curt Connors physically there talking to Iron Man, while Iron Man brains people that just got bit by vampires. So Curt Connors is trying to cure them, and he's very iffy about using an experimental drug because the last time he did that, he turned into a giant lizard. And so that's really all we have to go off of. I could see him being added to the game. Here's the issue, though. I don't think he has that big of a popularity to be added to the game. Even though he's a Spider-Man villain, I think there's more popular Spider-Man villains, such as Doc Ock and Green Goblin, or even Mysterio, to be added to the game before the Lizard. I think the Lizard could work in the game. I think you could actually go Vanguard or Strategist, or do a little bit of both, where he's able to heal as Curt Connors, similar to how Hulk is Bruce Banner as well. Maybe he can do the same thing, where he can turn huge as the Lizard, but then he can turn back normal and he does healing to people, instead of having like a random grenade like Hulk has. So I don't know exactly what role that would be. I would say it would be a strategist, and maybe his ult is that he turns into the Lizard. But then that would just be kind of boring to see a normal... You would just see a normal dude the whole time running around with one arm. I don't know. Like, there might be other characters to add before the Lizard. I could see him being added way down the road when they've already covered so many characters that they're like, you know what? We had the Lizard in the lore. Let's add him. So, I could see him working. I could see him even being a Vanguard where he's the exact same as the Hulk. Probably does a bunch of like dive abilities, does a bunch of strike attacks, but then when he turns normal, maybe he's able to do some healing, which I don't know how people would feel about that. Having a Vanguard that technically also works as a healer. So, moving on. Elsa Bloodstone! I actually have no clue who this character is. Elsa Bloodstone actually appeared in the Marvel presentation project, Werewolf by Night. So if you know her from that. And I actually could see this character working in the game, even though she has such a low popularity, because not a lot of people know her, compared to a bunch of other characters that exist that could be picked, such as a bunch of the X-Men, a bunch of other Avengers, and so on. Or even Black Bolt, but don't get me started on how many characters they're missing and which ones I want added to the game, because it's basically 100. Let me explain how Elsa Bloodstone would work from what I've researched a little bit and what I can speculate and guess from. I think how Overwatch has Hanzo, Widowmaker, and Ashe, I think Marvel Rivals would have the same thing of having Hawkeye, Black Widow, and then Elsa Bloodstone. And I think that Elsa Bloodstone would be the Ashe kind of character of the game. And I think she would also just fall under that it's a character with a gun in the game. Similar to Punisher and Winter Soldier, where you're going to have so many characters that are just, oh, it's this character but with a gun. And so that's what I could see happening with Elsa Bloodstone. I really don't know a lot about the character. I don't think she's as popular as, say, Gambit or Nightcrawler. And there's some other characters, too, on top of that. But I could see her actually being added. She's mentioned in the Jeff lore story, and that's basically it. Because Jeff mentions, like, 4 characters. And they're actually a couple that we're going to talk about at the very end. And that's really it.
There's really not a lot to go off of. So yeah. Moving on to Jericho Drumm, Brother Voodoo. He's actually pretty cool in the comics. He's mentioned in the Strange storyline, where Strange essentially looks across all universes. He sees Jericho Drumm and Daimon Hellstrom, and even his daughter Sophia becoming the Sorcerer Supreme. And that's all we can go off of. I think if they were to add more magic characters to the game, or characters that know how to use magic, I think they're going to be strategists. And I could essentially see Brother Voodoo being in the game as a strategist, since our already two magic characters are Scarlet Witch as Damage and Doctor Strange as Vanguard. I'm not saying that Brother Voodoo couldn't be the other roles, and you could essentially give him abilities to put him in any role, but I think it makes the most sense to be in a strategist, and it would actually be very interesting to see him have a team up ability with, say, Scarlet Witch and Doctor Strange. That would be cool. I think he actually has a higher likelihood than a lot of the 50% characters. I'm curious how far they'll actually mention him in the lore, and if he'll actually ever show up to help fight Doctor Doom or Dracula or Knull or any other villain they come across in Marvel Rivals. So, that's basically it. Let's move on to Wong!
It's basically the exact same thing with Brother Voodoo, Jericho Drumm. Wong, Doctor Strange mentions to Wong, who's physically there, like, hey, protect the Sanctum Sanctorum. I'm going to go try to travel across all the universes to figure out what's going on. I think it's the same thing, like I said, with Brother Voodoo. Wong's going to be added to the game. If they need more strategists and magical characters, he can fit in the damage role too if they really need to be. Here's the thing. I think he has a way lower chance of being added compared to Brother Voodoo because of skins. If they are to monetize the game and it is to be a free-to-play game, they're going to want a character that can be more interesting to create skins and create more unique ones that they can pull from the comics. And so I could see them using Brother Voodoo instead of Wong because of that reasoning. I'm not saying that they couldn't make fire skins for Wong. They definitely could. My boy's dripped out right here in this image. But, yeah. I think maybe 3-4 years down the line, you could see him being added to the game. If they've already gone through all the popular characters, they busted out your Ghost Rider, they got rid of Ultron, they got Thanos in the game, they got all your popular ones, then yeah, add Wong to the game. He'll help out a little bit. But moving on, let's talk about Kate Bishop. Kate Bishop's got a 1% chance. She's also mentioned in Jeff the Landshark's lore, where he's like, oh, what would Kate Bishop do to help solve this problem? I think it's a 1% chance of being added to the game, because if they're going to add Hawkeye to the game, they're going to play very similar. They're both bow characters. Yeah, she would probably solely use just the bow, unlike Hawkeye, who's probably going to use the bow and the sword. If they haven't even added Hawkeye yet, I don't see Kate Bishop being added until after Hawkeye. So I don't see her being added after Hawkeye or like Miss Marvel or Captain Marvel. So it's going to be quite a bit before you see her. I think it's a 1% chance, but you never know. Moving on to Gwenpool. Same thing as Kate Bishop. It's a 1% chance. She's in the Jeff the Lore story about, oh, how would Gwenpool get out of this? I think just like the Kate Bishop situation, it's a 1% chance because they haven't even added Deadpool. And Gwenpool is essentially a knockoff, or it's a rip of Deadpool is what it is. And so, if you're going to add Gwenpool, it'd be so odd to just skip a whole step where her whole character is based on Deadpool. So it just wouldn't make sense to add her before Deadpool, if you get what I'm saying. So if they add Deadpool at some point, then you could see Gwenpool showing up. But she would also be very similar to Deadpool, similar to how Kate Bishop is to Hawkeye. So I highly doubt she'll ever be added. I'm not trying to shoot down the shot and be like, no, this character is never... No. It's a 1%, and maybe in the future we'll see it, depending on how long the game lasts. On to our final character, Daimon Hellstrom. I literally have no clue who this is. I'm so sorry, Marvel. I know DC way more. Like, please, I'm sorry, bro. Please, I'm sorry. No, but for real, I don't know this character that well. He's mentioned in the Doctor Strange lore as when Doctor Strange is looking across the universe to see who's the Sorcerer Supreme, and he notices Daimon Hellstrom as one of them. It's like the Wong brother Voodoo. They could add this character if they needed healers or like strategists in the game, damage or whatever role. They could add him as a Vanguard. I don't really know exactly what he does, so I really can't say much about him. I don't believe Daimon Hellstrom is that popular to be added unless they added Brother Voodoo and Wong and a bunch of other magical characters. And they added everyone else that everyone likes. It's like all the unpopular characters, okay? This is probably a D-list character that's going to get added after all the A, all the B, all the C. I just don't see Daimon Hellstrom being added to the game. That's it.